Okay. So today we're going to go to the Hexagon Pool. With all these silly pictures, there we go. That's the Hexagon Pool. My guess is you've all been there, and that you'll be there in the future too. So in the southwestern Golan Heights, there's a beautiful site known as a Hexagon Pool. Let's see where it is on the map. Not far from the Jordan, kind of south, on the southwestern part there, right where that arrow is. And this pool, which is very popular, is known in Hebrew as Brechat Misshushim. This is how you pronounce it, Brechat Misshushim. Misshushim. Mishushe is a hexagon from the word shesh, which is 6. And most people are familiar with the name Shoshana, which is a lily from the rose family. And this is a lily that we have in Israel, in northern Israel. It's very rare. But you can see it has 6 petals. And that's the source of the name Shoshana, from Shesh. So Mishushim would be the way you say hexagons. And this is a pool full of hexagons. Over here on the right, in my Moshav Nov, we have a woman who sculpts out of basalt, which is incredibly difficult. She does amazing things. And she actually placed this at the beginning of the trail that goes down to Mishushim. Of course, she made a hexagon inside of the salt. It doesn't look that complicated. It's incredibly complicated. So down below here, you can see that when you come to go to the Misshushim Pool, if you drive into the parking lot, then you park your car and you hike down into the riverbed, which you can see there's a drop here. And when you finish, you have to walk back up to your car. It takes about 20 minutes to go down, about 30 minutes to come back up. It would be great if somebody could invent a waterfall that you could walk up to, so that you could walk down to your car, but we don't have any of those. In fact, I've never ever seen one, but we're in need of one. So the riverbed, which is known as Nachal Mishushim, is flowing all year round, and it's actually the longest riverbed in all the Golan, about 30 kilometers long at least, probably a little more. And there's about 40 springs that feed it. In the summer, that number goes down to about 30. But it flows all year round. It starts up near Mount Avital, which is near Bental. Most people have visited there, near around 900 meters above sea level. And then it goes down to the Kinneret, which is below 200 meters below sea level, around 210. So we're talking about a river that falls. The water goes down more than a kilometer until it gets to Lake Kinneret. So the Hexagon Pool is part of a big nature reserve, which is known as the Yehudia Nature Reserve. And for those people who've know, that's the riverbed where we used to jump into the water from above. And that's not open anymore because of an avalanche that was there. It may never, ever open again. You can still go to Yehudia, but it's not the same as it was. However, you can get to the Hexagon Pool if you don't want to do the drive right up to walk down, walk back up. You can actually connect a visit to the Hexagon Pool within an entire day of hiking. A serious hike, which would be about 6 hours long, that in the right season and with the right mood can be a very beautiful and challenging hike with a lot of beauty. So there is an entrance fee. Today you have to call in beforehand if you want to go. But there are a number of trails which converge and can bring you to the Misshushim Pool. So the pool, of course, is named for those beautiful hexagon basalt columns that are hanging over the pool, kind of like seeming defying gravity. And it seems to some that they've been chiseled by humans, but no, they're actually formed by nature. So let's take a look at how that actually happened. In the northern Golan, we have some very prominent volcanoes and ash cones. Also in the central Golan, these are 3 of them. There's more. This is chiffon, which means rye, R-Y-E, because they found a very rare rye form of rye that grows here. Bental, which is the most visited of all. And there's Faretz, which is the most complete. It's a complete cone, the only one we have in Israel. Not cone, a cone. And in those areas, you can find a lot of volcanic pebbles called tuf or scoria that come in various sizes. This is probably maybe a little more dramatic because this isn't from Israel. But this is from Krakatoa on the left, and I don't remember where it is on the right, Malaysia, I think. It was a violent, the ones in the north, those big ash cones are from violent eruptions. And there's a lot of gas that the molten lava gets thrown up into the air and falls back down. And it forms these kinds of rocks, which are called tuf, which is the smaller kind, like here on the bottom right. And scoria, which are the bigger ones. But those 2 are in many countries are interchangeable. But you can see that there's a lot of holes and that they're very, very light. You could actually throw this rock at someone and it wouldn't hurt, of course, depending on where you throw it. But it's a very, very light rock. So that's in the northern Golan. And that's a sign when you see these, this kind of rock, it means there was an eruption, which a lot of gas in it. But we're talking now about the southern Golan. We get talking about the Hexagon Pools, that area. The source of most of the basalt here is from a lava flow, not a huge, gigantic eruption into the sky, but rather something a little more modest. It usually comes from low hills, sometimes cracks in the ground that you can barely see today. Geologists say that the lava flow that was here a few million years ago in the southern Golan are kind of like the ones that you would see today in Hawaii, like this picture. And it's an eruption, but it's not an explosion. And here's another picture of Hawaii. And here's a very bright man over here on the right, taking a picture with his cell phone of the lava that's slowly coming towards him. I'm sure he deserves some kind of prize, as well as the person who's taking a picture of the guy taking a picture. Because if you trip and fall or this comes and covers part of you, you won't survive. But it's a very slow lava flow, as opposed to those violent, I mean, it's all violent, but not compared to the eruptions that we saw before. So when the lava flows slowly, then there's a huge change of temperature, because when it comes out of the ground, the magma is like 1,000 degrees Celsius. And obviously, when it hits the air and the earth, it's the temperature of the air and the earth that we're familiar with, much, much colder. When it gets down to about 600 degrees Celsius, that gooey lava quickly cools and hardens into what we know today as basalt. This would be from a lava flow like that. You'd see big boulders, you'd see huge slabs, and this you can't throw at someone. First of all, they're too heavy, but even if you took a little pebble of this and you threw it at someone, it would most likely hurt, as opposed to those light ones, because this had much less gas. It wasn't it wasn't an explosion, it was a lava flow. However, there are times when the lava flow, instead of turning into huge chunks, actually split up into hexagons. Or we could say, when trying to give a name for this this phenomenon, they're polygons, because they're not all hexagons. So polygons means they're columns with many different shapes. So why would some basalt turn into slabs and some basalt turn into polygons? Well, it depends on a number of factors. It could be the chemical ingredient of the magma, its elasticity, its temperature, and also the terrain that will direct its flow when it comes out on the ground. When columns form, some are four-sided, some are five-sided, some are seven-sided, but the majority are usually six-sided. In this specific pool, known as the Hexagon Pool, there are about 60 or so totally exposed columns. And in 1982, a geologist named Moshe Inbar went and counted every one of them and recorded their shapes. And he came up with the following statistics. About 40% of the polygons here were six-sided, and the other 60% were four and five and seven-sided columns. Now, geometrically, all those prisms should have been formed into hexagons, but in the real world, some are pentagons and heptagons, and not are all six-sided. The cracks and the shapes are a function of the thermal pressure inside the lava, and that is also influenced by the terrain. And that's why in some places, like the Hexagon Pool, there are other kinds of polygons. So mathematically, it's been proven, let's go back, that a system of cracks in a homogeneous body will most often split into six, because this way it relieves the pressure with the minimum amount of cracks. Prisms are formed as the lava flow turns into basalt rock. As the lava cools, it loses volume and actually compresses, shrinking and cracking into vertical slabs on the ground. Between the cracks, the sides or the ribs are formed, and a similar process happens in the ground. When clouds of earth dry up, the dirt loses water, it shrinks and it cracks, usually into all different kinds of shapes. So there are really only three geometric shapes into which these polygons can form and still fit in with each other. And those are mainly triangles, squares, and hexagons. Try this with a pen and paper, and you'll see between all these three options, the hexagon prism is the geometric shape with the largest surface areas in relation to the trapped volume. Or in other words, between the three shapes, the hexagon prism is the optimal geometric shape for cooling off or for losing heat from the center of the object towards the sides. So let's take a look. Of course, this isn't just in Israel, it's all over the world, wherever there has been lava. So you've got here Alaska and Armenia, Spain, Iceland has a lot. Perhaps the most famous of all is over here on the top left in Ireland, Giant's Causeway. Never been there, but heard about it. These are almost all perfect hexagons. Some say because it flowed into the sea and cooled very, very quickly. We've got Mexico and Russia and Scotland, with a little shout out to Rachel Henderson, who is from Scotland and is the producer of all of these shows that we've noted running on the internet. So thank you, Rachel. And she said she was actually born not far from this place. It's really a beautiful place. There's a cave in here. There's a number of caves, and you can see it sitting on top of sedimentary rock. Very beautiful. Haven't been there either. Got a long list. And in the United States, we've got very dramatic names. Paul Bunyan's Woodpile in Utah, Devil's Postpile in California. I don't know how far away that is from you, Stephanie, but looks pretty cool. And of course, in Wyoming, Devil's Tower. I don't really get the thing with the devil, but I don't know. There's all kinds of things. But let's take a look at this. If we were to, let's say, take circles and put them together, you can see that there's wasted room here. But if I have hexagons, I'm not losing any room at all. And nature loves to save energy and be efficient. And therefore, the hexagon often is preferred. Of course, what are we supposed to do with this information? Like, how can this help us in life? I only found one thing where it's actually practical in our life today. If we were to take a 6-pack of beer, over here on the left, you can see I chose it specially, and we were to make those cans hexagons, like you see on the right, we would be able to fit into the same area of a 6-pack, a 7-pack. That, folks, is practical information. We can do something with that. A whole nother beer that you could go to the store and not have to go back so often. But no, you just don't have, you know, cans that are hexagons. But that's a problem. I'm sure somebody's working on that. But that's a kind of a way to understand there's wasted room there. And in nature, we don't like to waste. So if we wanted to tile a plane with cells of equal size and have no wasted area, and we have really 3 options: triangles, squares, and hexagons. Hexagons will always win. And that's may have something to do with the following. We've got a famous game here on the bottom right, where everything fits together in hexagons. This is an ancient 1800-year-old mosaic in Italy, where they're using hexagon medallions. Pretty cool, and how they all fit together. Very nice, almost looks like a sphere there. And of course, we know of other things in nature that fit into 6. The most famous of all, of course, are the honeycombs. I did hear that when the bees actually make the wax, it circles, and then it forms, when they interface with each other, they form into hexagons on their own. People used to think that it was the wisdom of the bees that did it. Darwin wrote about it, but it's perhaps the most famous of all hexagons, but there's other things, and these are just some of them. We've got, on the top left, we've got the salt flats, which you've got in Russia and in Utah and other places, and you can see that most of them are hexagons. We've got dragonfly eyes in the middle up on top, where there's about 30,000 different hexagons that all interface with each other and allow those dragonflies to see and eat mosquitoes, which is what we like. Then we've got, moving to the right, we've got Saturn. On the edge of Saturn, there's also a hexagon. Please don't ask me about that, because I've never been there. And then we've got pineapples. Look at that on the right. That's pretty cool. On the bottom left, bubbles, although they aren't always perfect 120-degree angles, but they'll also usually, when you got a bubble raft, that'll go into hexagons. A snowflake is also a famous one. And turtles, some of these are pentagons, some are hexagons, but you can see that they're trying to work together, as it were. So yes, exactly. So as Ellen mentioned, Frankie Snyder, who's an expert in ancient floors, said that they work together, and that's really a beautiful thing. You're seeing actually nature coming together and working together, making hexagons. And of course, artists understood that and used it. And so those who can actually get the recording of Frankie's talk, which he gave for Isra Guides, it's everything she talks about is really fascinating. And she's definitely an expert in hexagons, that's for sure. So almost all of the hexagons that we find in stone are in basalt, but not all. The name of the phenomenon when rock polygons form as a hot mass cools off is called columnar jointing. That's not so important to remember that, but it is known as a phenomenon, and it's almost always in basalt. However, in rare cases, there is magma that's near sandstone that heats up the sandstone and changes its formation. And when it cools off, the sandstone then forms into polygons. They can only be found in about 5 countries. Paraguay has a bunch, South Africa, Canada, Egypt, and Israel. And where can you find it in Israel? In the site in Machtesh Ramon in the south, known as the carpentry shop. Even though when you go and take a look at it, you'll see in a lot of pictures, they're labeled basalt. It's not basalt. There is basalt in Machtesh Ramon, but the carpentry shop is actually sandstone. So how could this be? It's because magma was nearby and baked, as it were, the sandstone, and it changed its consistency. And when it cooled off, it went into, as you can see here on the left and the right, most of them are hexagon. So that's a rare phenomenon that we have in Israel and can be seen. It's a different process, but really we have a very similar result. Let's move on to Tzfat. David Friedman. Many of us have been there. Many leave note groups have heard classes by David. He's an amazing man, originally from Colorado, now in Tzfat for many years, and teaches about life and Kabbalah and art and his work. And he uses hexagons in much of his artwork. These are just 2 examples. On the left, you can see how there's a core of a hexagon, and you can see a Magen David, which is also 6-sided. So you can see he's playing here with the hexagon and the Magen David. And if we move to the right, take it even one step deeper, we have a hexagon, which is a fractal within a hexagon, and the 6 here are the 6 days of creation with Shabbat in the middle. And then that, the number 7, goes into 6 more and a 7th, and it goes on and on and on. So if you can't visit David Friedman in Tzfat, you can visit his website, which is here up on top. And he has many explanations for almost all the artwork there. And he's also very approachable. And if anybody has any questions or wants to learn more about his technique and the deep ideas that are behind it, then through his website, Cosmic Kabbalah, you can actually contact David and learn more about it. So we're allowing David Friedman's artwork to be kind of a segue because we see that in nature, the number 6 shows this connectivity, togetherness. But let's move on to Hebrew. In the Hebrew language, let's use gematria, which sounds very much like geometry, and see what the 6th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is. And lo and behold, it's a Vav. If Aleph is 1, Bet 2, Gimel 3, Daled Hey, the 6th is Vav. And this is definitely a very special letter, although according to the ancient Jewish tradition and the mystical tradition, all the letters are special. But Vav is special because, as you can see, it's a little line and a little chupchik on top, a little hook on top. And this is a letter that is also a word, like many of the other letters too. But the word that the Vav stands for is the word and. So let's say I wanted to say hot and cold in Hebrew. I would say hot, ve, cold. Okay? Ve is a letter, which is also a word. How often do you see a word and a letter that is shaped like its meaning? Because what is a better shape for the word and than a hook? So if I were to go to a hardware store in Israel today, and I would ask for a hook to hang up a picture on the wall, I would ask for a Vav. Like, hey, you got any Vavs here? And the guy would say, yeah, sure, it's right over there in aisle 6 or whatever. So in nature, if 6 stands for connectivity, then in the Hebrew alphabet and in the Hebrew language, 6 also stands for connectivity. And that's pretty cool. So you have a letter, which is a word, and its shape is its meaning. Pretty cool. Okay, I couldn't help it, but of course, There are different hooks that we're all familiar with, whether it be the Peter Pan hook on the left, the famous Kareem Abdul-Jabbar sky hook shot, and of course, Muhammad Ali with his right hook to Mr. Norton over there, famous boxing match. And those are not really hooks that connect. Those are hooks that usually divide. But here we have, of course, the classic fishing hook, which connects us with a fish, except if we were to ask the fish, he would probably say, so these are kind of like the negative hooks. I just thought we should mention that. So let's move on. It has been noted that when comparing Greek thought to Hebrew thought, the Greek philosophers tended to look at the world in binary terms, either or. You're either this or you're that. Hebrew thought, on the other hand, is much more likely to take an and approach, both in biblical as well as Talmudic thought. This idea is often summarized into the term elu ve'elu, this and that, or this and more of this. It's based on the following story from the Talmud in a tractate called Eruvin. It goes like this. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Shmuel, for 3 years, the school of Shammai disagreed with the school of Hillel. One said, the law is what we say. And the other said, the law is what we say. A heavenly voice announced, both of them are the living words of God. Both them and them. This became then a term, elu ve'elu. So I once met a person on a Lead Note program, and this is a picture, who had a very interesting tattoo. The word and was tattooed on this person's elbow. And I asked, why? And the answer was this. I kept hearing people saying either or. You're either this or you're that. And I always felt, why either or? Why can't I be both? And. This idea became so central to me that I decided to get a tattoo with the word and I put it on my elbow, which is the connecting limb between both parts of my arm. So I'd have to say that's really probably the most Jewish tattoo I've ever seen, except maybe for Mom. That's a different story. Anyway, moving right along. Let's talk about one of the first stories mentioned in the Torah, Cain and Abel. In Hebrew, that would be Cain and Hevel, but we'll use the English word names here so people will be familiar with it. Cain kills his brother Abel, as you can see here in chapter 4 in the book of Breshit in Genesis, and the verses are like this. And Hashem says to Cain, where is Abel, your brother? And Cain says, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And Hashem says, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is screaming out to me from the earth. That is a very powerful story. Hashem punishes Cain and condemns him to fail as a farmer, to wander all over the land. But Cain complains to God that his punishment is too harsh and that anyone who would meet him would kill him. So Hashem put a sign on Cain so that those who would see him would not hurt him. What was the sign? So in Hebrew, the word that is used in the Torah is ot. But ot can mean two things. We already said that Hebrew and Hebrew thought is and. So it could mean sign and it could mean letter. So perhaps it could be also a letter that's a sign. We've already seen some letters are signs or symbols of their meaning. So did Hashem put a sign on Cain or a letter? Elu ve'elu. It doesn't say where he put the sign either. And by the way, the Hebrew can mean he put a sign on Cain. It could also be understood he put a sign for Cain, because the sign actually was to help him not get murdered. And as we've already said, it can be both. The sign on Cain could also be for Cain. So in the Midrash, known as Breshit Rabbah, there are no less than 6 ideas of what this sign or letter was. Here are some of the examples. He was struck with leprosy, and people would see that he was a leper, and they wouldn't kill him. That would be the sign. Another, he was given a dog. I'm not kidding. Given a dog, and that would be the sign that would protect him. Another says he grew a horn like a unicorn somewhere out of his head. Another rabbi says he was denied the gift of Shabbat. That's deep. I don't totally understand that, but that's kind of cool. And yet another says Cain himself became the sign, like be the sign. In another midrash known as Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, it says that Hashem wrote one of the 22 Hebrew letters on his arm. By the way, the tattoo person did not know of this midrash. That just came from within. But yet another source known as Midrash HaGadol says the following: Hashem took a letter from his own divine name and wrote it on Cain's face. And finally, another midrash says that he engraved a letter from Hashem's name into his forehead. Engraved it. Now, if we accept the last most famous idea, also mentioned, by the way, by the famous commentator known as Rashi, that would narrow it down to 3 letters of Hashem's 4-letter name, because there's 2 Heys. That would be either a Yud or a Vav or a Hey. But it doesn't mention in the Midrash which letter that was. However, in the main text of the Kabbalah, and I am not a Kabbalist in any way, but the main text is known as Tikkunei HaZohar, it is written the following, and I quote, "And because Cain felt remorse about murdering his brother, Hashem placed the letter Vav on him to save him. And it must be explained why, of all the letters, Hashem engraved on him the letter Vav." So according to this interpretation, okay, if this would be, instead of, I kind of tried to erase the lightning bolt there and put on a Vav, you can imagine this. According to this interpretation, Cain killed his brother and it didn't seem to bother him so much. He didn't take any responsibility. He didn't care. And his punishment was that he would become homeless. He would be a wanderer with no farming possibilities. In other words, for this murderer that wouldn't take any responsibility, nobody would take responsibility for him, not even the land. But he appealed to Hashem. My punishment is too great. Everyone will want to kill me. So Hashem gave him a letter, a sign that would be educational. Here is a man who was not connected to his brother, to anybody. He was in it just for himself. He took responsibility for nothing. The way to fix this was for him to carry a sign that others would see. He would become a signpost. He would be an educator without even trying, and he would be broadcasting a totally different message. He himself would be the sign. Now that's really an interesting idea of taking responsibility. And that idea of being your brother's keeper has been taken many different directions by people all over the world. Here are just a few examples. The Righteous Among the Nations that saved people during the Holocaust. A book about Americans who volunteered in the IDF during the War of Independence. An opportunities that's connected with former President Obama. And here in the bottom left, the Shomer Chadash organization, which has the t-shirts, brother keeper, as it were, Shomer Achi, the keeper of my brother. So if we wanted to sum up, we would say the interconnectedness of all things. And there was someone on the Leave Note staff named Steph Foster who came up with this idea. The interconnectedness of all things, and especially people. We are now, right now, in the season of the Jewish calendar known as the 3 weeks, when we mourn the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple and our independence, close to 2,000 years ago. According to our tradition, we lost all of these precious things because of baseless hatred, because we didn't care about our siblings. Therefore, many Jewish thinkers and sages have stressed the importance of countering that with baseless love. I want to let you know that today, in the Times of Israel, Aryeh Ben David wrote a fascinating article just about this. And it was published there. I strongly suggest reading it. It's in the blog section about how this needs to be a priority today in the Jewish world. So this is the time of year that the message of the Vav is so relevant. It's as if our ancient texts and our art and nature itself is telling us, be connected, take responsibility, be your brothers and sisters' keeper. And Hashem could express this entire idea with one letter, one stroke, a single line with a tiny hook, as if to say, know the idea of six in nature. Fit yourself into the great lava flow of humans. Cooperate and interface with others and care for them. Leave the either or idea to the Greeks. Be a Hebrew. Be a hook. Be an and. Be a brother keeper. Good luck to us all in that task. Toda rabah. Thank you all for your ears. And